So let me say this very clearly for all 99 of my colleagues. Nobody serving in this chamber can even begin to imagine what a completely scorched earth Senate would look like. None of us have served 1 minute in a Senate that was completely drained of comedy and consent. This is an institution that requires unanimous consent to turn the lights on before noon, to proceed with a garden variety floor speech, to dispense with the reading of lengthy legislative text, to schedule committee business, to move even non-controversial nominees at anything besides a snail's pace. So, Mr. President, I want our colleagues to imagine a world where every single task, every one of them, requires a physical quorum, which, by the way, the Vice President does not count in determining a quorum. Everything that Democrat Senates did to Presidents Bush and Trump, everything the Republican Senate did to President Obama, would be child's play compared to the disaster that Democrats would create for their own priorities if they break the Senate. So this is not a trade-off between trampling etiquette but then getting to quickly transform the country. That's a false choice. Even the most basic aspects of our colleagues' agenda, the most mundane task of the Biden presidency, would actually be harder, not easier, for Democrats in a post-nuclear Senate that is 50-50, dead even. If the Democrats break the rules to kill Rule 22 on a 50-50 basis, then we will use every other rule to make tens of millions of Americans' voices heard. Perhaps the majority would come after the other rules next. Perhaps Rule 22 would just be the first domino of many, until the Senate ceased to be distinct from the House in any respect. This chaos would not open up an express lane to liberal change. It would not open up an express lane for the Biden presidency to speed into the history books. The Senate would be more like a 100-car pileup, nothing moving. And then there's the small matter that majorities are actually never permanent. The last time a Democratic leader was trying to start a nuclear exchange, I remember offering a warning. I said my colleagues would regret it a lot sooner than they thought. And just a few years and a few Supreme Court vacancies later, many of our Democratic colleagues said publicly that they did. Touching the hot stove again would yield the same result, but even more dramatic. As soon as Republicans wound up back in the saddle, we wouldn't just erase every liberal change that hurt the country. We'd strengthen America with all kinds of conservative policies with zero input from the other side. How about this? Nationwide right to work for working Americans. Defunding Planned Parenthood in sanctuary cities on day one. A whole new era of domestic energy production. Sweeping new protections for conscience and the right to life of the unborn. Concealed carry reciprocity in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Massive hardening of security on our southern border. We saw during amendment votes just days ago that some common sense Republican positions actually enjoy more support right now than some of the Democratic committee chairs' priorities. And this is with them in the majority. So the pendulum, Mr. President, would swing both ways, and it would swing hard.
Just so we're clear about what's happening here, while Democrats are considering eliminating or reforming the filibuster, McConnell's threatening to bring the business of the Senate to a halt. He's basically saying, okay, you can't pass legislation, but if you try to take steps to try and pass legislation, I'll make it so that you can't pass legislation. In other words, I'm not exactly sure what Democrats have to lose here, and McConnell knows that, which is why he's lobbing desperate threats on the floor of the Senate. Here's McConnell's strategy. Block everything that Senate Democrats are trying to do so that people become disillusioned with yet another do-nothing Congress, and he'll capitalize on that backlash by retaking power. The filibuster is a key element of that. It is the principal tool that he needs to stop Democrats from enacting popular legislation. I mean, think about it. Republicans aren't looking to pass good legislation, they're looking to block good legislation because it reflects well on Democrats. That's why they unanimously blocked the American Rescue Plan, despite it having support from 75% of Americans. If they'll block that bill, a COVID relief package in the middle of a pandemic, then they'll block anything, because hurting Democrats is more important than helping Americans. Now, McConnell issues threats promising to pass Republican agenda items, like defunding Planned Parenthood in sanctuary cities, implementing nationwide right-to-work laws, pro-life legislation. So in other words, McConnell's threat is that if Democrats eliminate the filibuster to pass nationally popular legislation, he'll retaliate by passing nationally unpopular legislation. That's not an advantage, that's a burden. And by the way, McConnell couldn't even get 50 votes for any of these when Republicans did control the entire government. So what makes him think that suddenly Republicans are going to want to jump on board for nationwide anti-abortion legislation? What makes him think that Republicans are going to want to jump on board for nationwide anti-union legislation? Do Republicans really want to stake their futures on voting for legislation that only a fraction of the US supports as they head into their next elections? The reality is that if ending the legislative filibuster was good for Republicans, they'd have already done it, just like they did for Supreme Court justices. Let's not pretend here that Republicans have ever limited themselves in terms of rewriting the rules to benefit their own party. In reality, Senate Republicans already nuked the filibuster when it comes to getting everything that they want. They got 3 Supreme Court justices in Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. They got their tax cuts for the ultra-rich and corporations. None of that required a 60-vote threshold. The fact is that only one party benefits from keeping the legislative filibuster because only Republicans are trying to stop progress. If 0 new laws were passed, that would help the GOP. They want no federal protections of elections. They want no federal protections for LGBT Americans. They want no federal legislation codifying women's reproductive rights. They want no federal legislation reforming policing. Doing nothing helps Republicans. It's only the Democrats who want to pass legislation. So nuking the filibuster isn't some burden for both sides, it's a burden for Republicans, because that'll mean good and popular legislation will get passed. Legislation like H.R. 1, which enjoys the support of the majority of Americans. Like a Background Checks Act, which is supported by 90% of Americans. Like a path to citizenship for dreamers, like protecting women's reproductive rights. The filibuster is the only thing standing in the way of that agenda getting passed, an agenda that is provably popular with the American people. Keep in mind too, the principal reason that we're even talking about eliminating the filibuster is to pass H.R. 1 because Republicans are trying to legislate Democrats out of government. This isn't about tipping the scales in Democrats' favor, it's about balancing them. It's about blocking a raft of voter suppression bills sprouting up across the country that Republicans are introducing because they recognize that they can't win on their agenda, and so their only option is to make sure that people who vote for Democrats just can't vote at all. That is why we're having this conversation. So if McConnell has beef with having to take this measure, he has Republicans in state legislatures across the country to thank. So he can pretend like preserving the filibuster is his patriotic duty and that the future of the Senate as an institution depends on it, but that is straight gaslighting. If the Senate fails to eliminate the filibuster and election reform isn't achieved, then voter suppression bills aimed specifically at young voters, at black and brown voters, at Democrats in general will continue to pass in states across the country. Gerrymanders will usher in an era of permanent Republican rule, permanent minority rule. We escaped the grips of an autocratic leader once, but Republicans have fully embraced this anti-democratic form of government, and they're trying to do it again, only now more organized, more coordinated, and more intent on entrenching their own power by whatever means necessary. Nuking the filibuster isn't an option, it's a necessity. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell. And please subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I not only break down the biggest stories of the week, but I also interview major players in the world of politics, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, Jamie Raskin, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.